Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. Going on. What I want to do now, I do want to go ahead and switch gears and kind of just talk about the big picture of the job, and then also beyond that, not just the big picture of the job, but also who are the realistic candidates. By the way, as you can see on the bottom of the screen, make sure you're following our Torres on Indiana account, late breaking news. Carter does a great job of helping me with that. He is the intern that is helping me, but make sure you're following Torres on Indiana, Torres on IU, because we are going to have a lot of coverage of this coaching search over the next couple months, and we think that's the perfect place for you to be. So first off, let's talk about the job, okay? Because to me, when it comes to this job, a couple things stand out. First of all, I think it's a better job than a lot of other people do. And what I would say about the job is what I said the other day. What I said was, listen, every job has its strengths, weaknesses, whatever. And I think there's this notion kind of on a national scale that, oh, it's Indiana, they haven't been good for this many years, and da-da-da-da, and nobody's going to want that job. I actually think it's the exact opposite. Listen, first of all, let me say this, and this is no disrespect to Indiana, because I would say the same thing about Kentucky. I'd say the same thing about Carolina, all that stuff. I don't think that, I think coaches sort of revere it as a great job, a great opportunity. But the reason any coach wants a job in 2024, 2025, do you have the money? Do you have the resources to compete at the highest level? And there's no doubt that if you're in the Big Ten or you're in the SEC, you're going to have the money needed to win at the highest level. Look at the SEC. Every team in the SEC is good. I mean, even the teams that are at the bottom of the standings were great in the out of conference, and it's because they have the money, they have the resources, they have NIL. And so you're going to be set up to succeed. You can criticize Indiana for whatever. As I said a minute ago, that NIL budget was as good as any budget in all of college basketball this offseason. And so if a coach goes into the portal saying, I can compete with anybody for any player that I want, that's where every coach wants to be, no different than any other sport. The Dodgers GM job is better than the Tampa Bay Rays GM job. It's just a fact. By the way, where did the Dodgers GM Andrew Friedman come from? Tampa Bay, for that exact reason. And so I think coaches want it. I think the other thing worth noting, you know how I know it's still a good job? Because you can make fun of the process that got us to Mike Woodson, but who did Mike Woodson replace? He replaced Archie Miller, who was quite literally the hottest candidate on the market before he took that Indiana job. It didn't work out, but everybody wanted Archie Miller when he was available. He chose Indiana. Tom Crean, we can make fun of the way it worked out. He was the hottest candidate available that year, and he was the hottest candidate a few years before that when he turned down the job and didn't take it. And so I just bring it up to say, I do believe this is a good job. And so with it, let's get to some of the potential candidates for this job, okay? So first of all, you guys are going to laugh because I got to start with kind of the two names that I think we have to start with, okay? I think the first group of candidates are the guys that you have to call, even though there is a 99.99999999999% chance that they say no. And I think the first guy you have to call, I know who you think I'm going to say, and I'm going to say it, and you can laugh, but I have no problem with you going through the process of trying to get this guy. It's Indiana native Brad Stevens. Now, to be clear, I don't think Brad Stevens is taking the job. I think he's got maybe the best job in basketball right now. He's not a coach. He doesn't have to travel. He doesn't have to game plan, but his team is awesome with the Boston Celtics. He's a GM front office guy now. Doesn't have to deal with the day-to-day stress of being a coach. And the other thing is, I was talking to Mike Luke about this today. Mike Luke, the Arizona guy. I was on his pod. We were talking about Brad Stevens. And I said, the thing too is it's not only a great job, your two superstars are young. Like Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown are 26, 27, 27, 28, whatever it is. You got another 5, 6, 7, 8 years runway with those guys. And so if you're the GM, I don't know why you'd want to leave. What do you got? Another 2-3 rings potentially in you if you play this thing right? And so I think it'd be crazy. I think the other thing worth noting, Brad Stevens is only 48 years old. And so I bring it up because I'm pretty sure that he's still got relatively young kids. And when I say relatively young, I don't mean like they're 2 and 3 years old, but I think he's still got kids in high school. And it's like, you got a great job. Nobody's forcing you out. You're not getting fired with the Boston Celtics. And so to me, it's like, you got a great job. Your kids are still in high school. What are you going to do? Move them in their junior year of high school, sophomore year of high school, when they've been in the same school system now for what, like 10, 12 years? Like, I just don't think it's realistic. So I think you call. I think you do the Godfather offer like you did before you hired Woodson, because there's no shame in doing it. I just don't think it's very realistic. I will counter that by saying, who I do think is realistic from kind of those NBA ranks? I think that you could at least get on the phone, and I think you could have an interesting conversation with Billy Donovan. I know it sounds crazy. Billy Donovan, why would he want to come back? Why would he want to do this? Well, it's the same reasons that we talked about with the Kentucky job a year ago. With the Kentucky job, if you remember, and we talked about it at the time, and I truly believe this, and I still truly believe it, is that when the Kentucky job opened, my understanding, and I talked to people who would know, Billy Donovan was willing to listen to the Kentucky job. The issue was him and the Chicago Bulls were in the play-in tournament. And basically, Mitch Barnhart's policy on that was like, if you win a game, what would it be? 2 games in the play-in tournament. Now it's another 2 weeks before I can hire you. And he just said, with this portal world that we live in, like, I can't be hiring a guy in the middle of April, late April. Like, you just can't do it. And so they kind of went their separate ways from Billy Donovan. But what I was basically told about Billy Donovan, he would have entertained the Kentucky Wildcats if they had been willing to wait until the Bulls season officially ended. They were not, but you now look at the Chicago Bulls. I know they just re-signed Lonzo Ball, and that's all well and good. They stink. They're in 10th place in the Eastern Conference. They're 22-30. I think by the time it's all said and done, they're going to miss the playoffs. And so all of a sudden, is that a situation where Billy Donovan is now through what, year 5 at with the Chicago Bulls? So Billy Donovan, I would assume, wouldn't want to assume, I think he's getting fired after this year, okay? And so if Billy Donovan's getting fired, it's like, one, he's not getting another NBA head coaching job, okay? This is year 5. He's made it to the playoffs one time as the Chicago Bulls head coach. And then, oh, by the way, outside of the year that he had KD and Russell Westbrook, he never made it out of the first round with OKC either. So the truth is, listen, Billy Donovan's not getting a third NBA head coaching job. And the crazy thing about Billy Donovan, even though he's got all that gray hair now, he's still only 59 years old. And so I just sit there and say, like, 59 years, is that a guy that wants to retire at 59 years old? Bill Belichick is freaking 73. He just took a college job. Pete Carroll, 72, 73. Rick Pitino, 72. Like, guys still want to work. And if you're Billy Donovan, you can get a truly great job, come back to college. And I think you have an opportunity to do pretty well. The other thing that I would add, Billy Donovan left college 4, 5, 6 years ago. I guess it was like 10 years ago now, which seems crazy. But he left 10 years ago because of the fact that, like, he just didn't want to deal with the recruiting stuff. And if you remember at the time, recruiting was kind of getting crazy. There was no loyalty. Everybody, let's just call it what it was. Everybody had agents at the time, even though they weren't called agents, and everybody pretended that it was still amateurism. Everybody had agents. Everybody's dealing with stuff behind the scenes. And I just think that, in my opinion, he just got tired of all the nonsense. Well, now, listen, it's the portal. Listen, let me put it this way. If you choose to, and I don't know that this is the best way to do it, you can basically spend 1 month a year recruiting, which is April after the season ends. You get a roster, you retain 3, 4 guys. And if you don't want to recruit high school, you don't have to. And then, you're recruiting another 5, 6 every year. I mean, if you do it right, you don't have to do very much recruiting during the regular season. I mean, I still think you should send assistant coaches out on the road to kind of keep those relationships. But Billy Donovan, 8, 9 years ago, you get a kid to commit in July. Then you got to fly up to his high school to watch practices. You got to fly up to his games. You get him signed. Now he doesn't feel love. He wants to decommit. It was a lot of stuff. It's different now. You have a collective. You have NIL. This is how much we have. This is what we offer. I coach in the NBA. You can play in front of 18,000 fans or whatever it is. You can play in the Big Ten. And it's either you take it or you leave it. And if not, we move on to the next guy. And so I actually think Billy Donovan is realistic. I don't think Brad Stevens is, but I do think Billy Donovan is realistic. With that said, let's keep it going. Let's keep it going because there are a couple more things, a couple more guys that I think are at least worth conversating about. And they are, some names that you're probably pretty familiar with. The one name that I do think Indiana can get, who's very good, and I see it in the chat, is Chris Beard. So Chris Beard, for people who do not know, well, I mean, I think he's the Ole Miss head coach coming off that win against Kentucky. Chris Beard, for people who do not know, remember, this is a guy that has ties to Bobby Knight. This is a guy that coached under Bob Knight at Texas Tech. He reveres Bob Knight. He still talks about him. And I will tell you this, I don't think that it was a coincidence that at halftime of the Kentucky Ole Miss game a few nights ago, Chris Beard was asked about his coaching style, about this and about that. And he basically said, like, yeah, that's an old Bob Knight, axiom of basically, hey, we got to do this to win, blah, 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 blah. And I don't even remember what he was talking about. I just know that he basically brought up Bobby Knight out of nowhere. Now, I know Indiana fans will be like, oh, he brings up Bob Knight all the time. That's his mentor. I thought the timing was pretty convenient. And the thing with Chris Beard, listen, I think he's one of the best coaches in the country. And what I would say about Chris Beard is, listen, he's not going to retire at Ole Miss. I can tell you for a fact, there was a moment in time where I think he was ready to go to Arkansas last year. And people say, Arkansas, Ole Miss, same thing. But remember, he was at Little Rock before, he went to Texas Tech. And when he was at Little Rock, he got the attention of some very important people in that state. And so I think he was ready to go to Arkansas. Now, depending on who you ask, some people say Arkansas fumbled the bag. Some people say Chris Beard pulled out. And some people just said, basically, end of story, is that Arkansas got wind that, hey, John Calipari might be interested in this job, and they kind of went in that direction. The point I'm trying to make, I don't think Chris Beard is tied to Ole Miss for the rest of his career. I think he stayed, at Ole Miss this offseason out of respect for them, because they basically hired him when he was unhireable. But after 2 years, gets him to the NCAA tournament. I don't think he's going to be afraid to say, you know what, I'm going to try something different, and I'm going to try a high-profile job and a place that my mentor built into a power. And oh, by the way, it's no different than Mark Pope at Kentucky, Dan Hurley at UConn. If you can take the historically great team back to the power that they've once been, you're an icon in that area and in that state. And I think Chris Beard's the guy that's crazy enough to say, I want the responsibility of bringing Indiana, back to the elite of college basketball. Now, realistically, I will say, listen, there's some stuff with Chris Beard that, you have to be comfortable with. We know about the allegations from a few years ago. We know why he was arrested. We also know that the charges were eventually dropped. And so ultimately, what you got to figure out is, was that a one-off deal? Was it true? Was it not true? And is he going to be somebody that does something similar to this if we bring him into our community? Okay. And so to me, that would be, listen, I don't know if it would be my first call, because I think my first call would be to Brad Stevens, even if he's going to say no. But I will counter that by saying that I think Chris Beard is kind of the first name on the list that I think he would say yes. And I think it's easy to sit there and say, no, he wouldn't. He's not going there. You guys talk about guys like Chris Beard all the time. He ain't retiring at Ole Miss, okay? No disrespect. I don't know if we have any Ole Miss fans in the chat. He's not retiring at Ole Miss. He's going to go somewhere else. He's going to do something else. And my guess would be it's probably going to be very soon. It's almost like Will Wade at McNeese, is that I don't think Will Wade was seriously considering other offers from last year because he felt like he owed McNeese another season with them. And then you fast forward and, he ends up doing his own thing. So I bring it up because I think year 2 for Beard, I think that to me, it's very realistic that he could end up going somewhere else. And if you're Indiana, you would be crazy not to make the call. A couple other names. Listen, I'll say this. Indiana fans are convinced that Dusty May, who of course will be in Assembly Hall on Saturday afternoon, Saturday evening, whenever they play, would be interested in this job. Okay, so Dusty May is the Michigan head coach. Dusty May, remember last year, Indiana fans were trying to force Mike Woodson out because they were like, this guy, Dusty May, just went to a Final Four at Florida Atlantic. We have to get him before another school does. And so at the time, it was like, is it going to be Louisville? Is it going to be Ohio State? He chooses Michigan. But what's important to note about Dusty May is that Dusty May has a very reasonable buyout, right? And so there were a couple candidates that I heard people throwing around that I just thought were ridiculous because of buyouts. Does he want the job? Does he not? TJ Ottsberger has a $17 million buyout. No school in America is paying a $17 million buyout for a head coach because it's just too much. NIL coming in where you got to pay $20 million per school to your athletes, with the cost of what it's going to take to actually, build out a staff, like TJ Otzelberger's guy, like you're not paying $17 million to TJ Otzelberger just to get him out of his Iowa State contract, then another $6 million a year to pay him, then another $1.5 million to $2 million for a staff. It's just not happening. Money doesn't grow on trees. It's not like my grandma, but you get the point. And so I don't think TJ Otzelberger is realistic. But to get back to Dusty May's got actually a very reasonable buyout. I think it's like $4 million, maybe even less. And so $4 million is a lot different than 16 or 17 million. You get him for $4, you pay him $5, whatever. And I just think he's an interesting candidate. Take a quick swig, by the way. Give me a second. All right, good stuff. I don't know. One thing I will say, and I try to be transparent with you guys. I try to spit facts. The one thing I will say, what I do not know about Dusty May, I have no idea what his interest would be. I will tell you this. I think if Indiana calls Chris Beard, I think he is interested. If they call Brad Stevens, I do not think he's interested. The one thing I will say about Dusty May, I have no feel for if he has any interest in leaving Michigan. My hunch would say that he probably is not. 1 year, I know it's his alma mater, but I think he's probably at the point where he's like, we're just starting to build something. We're one of the better teams in the Big Ten. I'm happy here. It's a football school. Sharon Moore is going to get headlines 9 months out of the year, 10 months out of the year. And all I got to do is go ahead and, just win some games in between, and whatever happens in March happens in March. So I tend to think that I don't know if he would be interested, but I do think it's at least worth a call. And I think it's obviously a call that Indiana is going to make. So those are those guys. A couple other names that come to mind for me. By the way, just doing all this off the top of my head, we're at the 30-minute mark after doing an hour and a half podcast. Other names that come to mind for me, Todd Golden at Florida, another guy that had some off-the-court accusations this year, was cleared of any wrongdoing. I don't know that, I don't know that Florida's the last job for him. It's a good job in the SEC. I don't know that it's a great job, like very good NIL. I give him credit. He's done a lot better than I thought he would do. But you do wonder, like, he's a guy that's not afraid to climb the ladder, right? Was at San Francisco, immediately flies across country and takes the Florida job. And the other thing I go back to, too, Indiana, I think in the pecking order of the Big Ten, is probably a little bit of a better job than Florida in the SEC. Florida, by the way, is set to lose most of their team. Walter Clayton's a last-year guy, fifth-year guy. Elijah Martin's a fifth-year guy. So you wonder if maybe, Todd Golden wants a reset. He's still very young. But does he want a potential reset? Because then you get to start fresh. You don't have to build the Florida roster. And again, I think the NIL is so good. I think all that, you have to at least listen. The other thing, too, the SEC is just a gauntlet. And you could say the Big Ten and the SEC run college sports. That's fine. But SEC basketball this year is a beast. And to me, I think there's going to be a few coaches over these next few years. Do you try to get out for an ACC job, for a big East job, whatever? Some of these conferences where it's a little bit more manageable to climb the ladder and a little bit more manageable to make your moves. And so I think he would at least listen. I think it'd be an interesting conversation. Kind of in that same vein, who else I kind of feel the same way about? Chris Jans. Is like, Chris Jans is really, really, really good. Really, really, really good. And he's at a really tough spot at Mississippi State. Mississippi State, respectfully, is a very good job. It's a very good job, but in the SEC, it's probably a bottom 3, bottom 4 job. And you wonder, like, how much better is it going to get? And how much more does that guy want to bang his head against the door trying to break through? When, again, honestly, it's just a situation where Arkansas has better resources, whoever. Tennessee has better resources. Kentucky certainly has better resources. Texas A&M, LA, there's plenty of jobs that I think would be that I think that he would have to at least consider, because that's just such a tough place to coach. So those are my candidates. I think you got to call Brad Stevens. I think you got to call Billy Donovan. And then from there, I think you would also have to call Chris Beard. I think he's the first. I think he's going to say yes if you take it. A couple names I don't think. I said TJ Otzelberger. Listen, $17-18 million buyout. It's not happening. Like, again, just think about it like this. Schools are going to have to pay players $20 million, okay? Indiana just signed Signetti to a new deal. What was it? $8-9 million a year. On top of that, You would have to pay now $17 million, $16 million for TJ Otzelberger to get him out of that contract. That's assuming he wants to come. But, 16, 17 million just to get him out of that contract. You're going to have to pay Woodson something. Then on top of that, you got to pay Otzelberger another 5 or 6 to be your head coach. So that one just never made sense to me. Scott Drew, listen, I've seen some Scott Drew stuff. If you're going to turn down Kentucky and Louisville, you're not taking Indiana. Like, what are we even talking about? He's retiring at Baylor. Good for him. They're going to have a statue built for him. He won a national championship at a place that I still think that's the greatest rebuilding job in the history of college basketball. But he is not leaving for another job.